September 6, 1997. Buckingham Palace. The crowd outside had been waiting for hours. Some were crying, some held flowers, some simply stood in silence, watching the palace gates as though expecting an answer from the building itself. Then the sound changed. The funeral procession was approaching. Princess Diana was coming past Buckingham Palace for the last time. The woman who had entered those gates as a 19-year-old bride was returning in a coffin, and standing outside the palace was Queen Elizabeth II. Beside her were members of the royal family. The Queen had spent almost her entire life being bowed to. Presidents bowed, courtiers bowed, foreign dignitaries bowed. Millions knew that small lowering of the head as a symbol of respect for the sovereign. But when Diana's coffin reached the palace, something happened that millions of people watching television would remember for decades. Elizabeth lowered her head. She bowed to Diana. The Washington Post would later describe the moment as one of the most remarkable gestures of that extraordinary week. The Washington Post, it lasted only seconds, but those seconds would become extraordinarily important years later, because Diana was gone. Charles would eventually marry Camilla Parker Bowles. Camilla would enter the royal family. She would stand beside Charles at ceremonies Diana once attended. She would eventually become queen, and with every step Camilla took toward the center of royal life, one uncomfortable question followed her. Would Diana slowly disappear? Would photographs change? Would titles change? Would a new royal marriage replace the old story? Would Diana eventually become nothing more than a tragic chapter the monarchy preferred not to reopen? Some believed that was exactly what would happen. But there was a problem. Before Camilla could ever occupy those rooms, before she could become Duchess of Cornwall, before she could become Queen Consort, Queen Elizabeth had already done something that made completely removing Diana from royal history almost impossible. She had acknowledged her, publicly, personally, and permanently. To understand why that mattered, we have to return to the days immediately after Diana died. August 31st, 1997, Paris. The news reached Britain before dawn. Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead at 36. The reaction was immediate. Flowers appeared outside Kensington Palace, then more, and more. Soon the pavement seemed to disappear beneath them. People who had never met Diana cried openly. They wrote messages. They left photographs. They brought candles. Britain was experiencing something the monarchy had rarely confronted on this scale, grief that did not require permission from the institution. The public had already decided what Diana meant to them. And initially, Buckingham Palace seemed unable to respond at the same emotional speed. The Queen was at Balmoral with Prince Philip, Charles, William and Harry. William was 15, Harry was 12. The Queen's priority, according to the explanation later given, was protecting two boys who had just lost their mother. But outside Balmoral, that private concern was almost invisible. The public saw silence, and silence became dangerous. Where was the Queen? Why was the royal standard not lowered? Why had the family remained in Scotland? Why was nobody speaking? The institution that had always presented restraint as dignity suddenly discovered that restraint could be interpreted as indifference. Diana had changed the emotional language of public life. Now her death was forcing the monarchy to speak that language. By September 5th, Elizabeth returned to London. That evening she appeared on television. Not in a pre-recorded Christmas message. Not speaking from behind the safe distance of ceremony, she addressed a country in grief, and she did something critical. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. Did not speak about Diana merely as the former wife of her son. She paid tribute to Diana in her own right. The Queen called her an exceptional and gifted human being. She said she had admired and respected Diana. She praised her energy, her commitment to others, and above all, her devotion to William and Harry, the royal family. Those words mattered, because royal language is rarely accidental. Elizabeth II had spent decades mastering the art of saying precisely enough and rarely more. She understood titles, she understood precedent. She understood what happened when a monarch placed words into the permanent public record. And now the sovereign herself had attached respect to Diana's name, not tolerance. Not polite regret, respect. That distinction would survive. The next morning came the funeral. Diana's coffin travelled through London toward Westminster Abbey. William and Harry walked behind it. So did Charles. So did Prince Philip. So did Diana's brother, Charles Spencer. Millions watched. And then, outside Buckingham Palace, the Queen lowered her head as the coffin passed. The Washington Post. There was no speech, no explanation. She did not need one. The gesture worked because everyone understood the symbolism. The Queen bows to almost nobody, yet Diana's coffin passed, and Elizabeth bowed. In that moment, royal protocol met public grief. And public grief won something: recognition. Years later, the monarchy would move forward. Monarchies always do. That is their defining instinct. People die, Titles transfer, portraits change, new spouses enter old rooms, one generation replaces another. Continuity is the institution's survival mechanism, and that brings us to Camilla. For much of the public, Camilla's name was inseparable from the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage. The history was painful. Charles and Camilla had known each other long before Diana entered the story. Their relationship became one of the defining controversies surrounding the Wales marriage. In Diana's famous 1995 TV interview, she described the marriage as containing 3 people. The line became one of the most remembered statements of her life. So when Diana died, any future attempt to integrate Camilla into royal life carried enormous risk. This was not simply about whether the public liked Charles as partner. Camilla occupied a place in Diana's story, and Diana occupied an enormous place in the public imagination. There could be no clean replacement. That became obvious when Charles and Camilla married in April 2005. Legally, as the wife of the Prince of Wales, Camilla could have used the title Princess of Wales. She did not. Instead, she was publicly styled Duchess of Cornwall. Contemporary explanations made clear why. The title Princess of Wales remained overwhelmingly associated with Diana, and using it for Camilla would have been extraordinarily sensitive. Later accounts described the decision as recognition of the enduring affection for Diana. In style, that fact is important because it complicates the dramatic claim that Camilla simply tried to erase Diana. There is no credible evidence of some secret campaign in which Camilla ordered Diana's name removed from royal history. The reality is more subtle, and perhaps more interesting. Institutions do not always erase people by destroying photographs. Sometimes they erase by continuing. A different woman stands beside Charles. A different name appears in programs. A different face occupies ceremonial photographs. The years accumulate, children grow older. Palace rooms are redecorated. Anniversaries pass. Memory becomes history. History becomes archive. That is how forgetting can happen without anyone issuing an order. And as Camilla became more established, that fear never completely disappeared. Would the monarchy's acceptance of her require society to soften what had happened to Diana? Would one woman's legitimization demand another woman's disappearance? Then came February 2022. Queen Elizabeth was approaching the 70th anniversary of her accession. She issued an extraordinary message about the future. When Charles became king, Elizabeth wrote, it was her sincere wish that Camilla should be known as Queen Consort. The royal family. It was enormously significant. For years, uncertainty had surrounded Camilla's eventual title. Now the Queen herself had settled it. Elizabeth was giving Camilla something no public relations campaign could manufacture, the sovereign's endorsement. For some Diana admirers, it hurt. The woman once seen as the third figure in Charles and Diana's marriage was now being publicly prepared to become queen. It could look like the final replacement. Diana had once been the young woman expected to stand beside Charles when he became king. Now another woman would, but look more carefully. Elizabeth had endorsed Camilla. She had not withdrawn a single word she had spoken about Diana. She had approved the future without rewriting the past. That is where the story becomes more complicated than the rivalry people often want it to be. Diana did not need to be queen to remain Diana. Camilla becoming queen could change the royal present. It could not undo September 1997. It could not make the TV broadcast disappear. It could not remove the Queen's public statement that she admired and respected Diana. It could not reverse that bow outside Buckingham Palace. And perhaps most importantly, it could not control William and Harry's memory of their mother. Diana's legacy had moved beyond palace ownership. Her sons carried it. Her charities carried it. Photographers carried it. Patients she had touched carried it. People who watched her walk through AIDS wards carried it. People who saw her campaign against landmines carried it, and millions who had never met her carried an emotional version of Diana that belonged to them rather than to the monarchy. That is why replacing Diana proved impossible. You can replace a title. You cannot necessarily replace a memory. There is a photograph that helps explain this. September 1997. Buckingham Palace. The Queen standing in black. Diana's coffin moving slowly past. Elizabeth lowering her head. Think about what the gesture did. For years, Diana had struggled against the feeling that the institution did not fully hear her. Her marriage deteriorated in public. Her private pain became tabloid material. Her behavior was interpreted, judged, and sometimes pathologized. She gave interviews partly because she wanted authorship over her own story. Then she died, and suddenly the institution faced a country that had already delivered its verdict. Diana mattered. The Queen's bow did not create that verdict. It recognized it. That is the difference. Elizabeth was not granting Diana importance. The public had already done that. The Queen was acknowledging something the monarchy could no longer deny. And once the monarch acknowledged it, Diana's place became harder to reduce later. Years after her death, Diana's influence remained visible in the way younger royals approached emotion, charity, and public contact. Historians and cultural writers continue to argue that her style changed expectations of what modern royalty should look like. The Washington Post, touch mattered, vulnerability mattered, speaking about suffering mattered. Diana had made distance look old-fashioned. The monarchy could move past her, but it could not easily move backward from what she had taught the public to expect. And there is another irony. Camilla herself eventually adopted a competitively restrained public role. She did not use Diana's Princess of Wales styling during Charles's years as heir. She spent years building her own charitable identity. She did not need to become Diana because trying to become Diana would have been impossible. Diana's position in public memory was too specific, too painful, too emotionally charged. When Elizabeth died on September 8, 2022, Charles became king. Camilla became queen consort in accordance with the late queen's expressed wish. The royal family, the royal story had moved forward, but then something revealing happened almost immediately. Charles's elder son William inherited the position of heir. Soon afterward, William became Prince of Wales, and Catherine became Princess of Wales. She was the first woman to publicly use that title since Diana. Glamour. Even then, Diana's presence remained. Every headline explaining Catherine's new title mentioned her. Every comparison returned to her. The title itself carried memory. 25 years after Diana's death, the monarchy could not say Princess of Wales without history entering the room. That is not erasure. It is the opposite. It is haunting. Not haunting in a supernatural sense. Historical haunting, the past remaining inside the language of the present. Camilla could become queen. Catherine could become Princess of Wales. Charles could become king. But Diana remained the missing figure whose absence explained part of every transition. And Queen Elizabeth understood something about history that perhaps the rest of the family learned more slowly. A monarch cannot control memory simply by controlling ceremony. In September 1997, the Queen was under enormous pressure. Criticism was intense. Public emotion had reached a level the palace was not accustomed to managing. Contemporary accounts describe that week as a crisis for the monarchy's relationship with the public. The Washington Post, Elizabeth could have responded defensively. Instead, she eventually did something more enduring. She entered Diana into her own record. She praised her. She recognized her devotion as a mother. Then she stood outside her palace and bowed. 2 gestures. Words. Then silence. But this time the silence meant something different. Respect. That is why the supposed battle over Diana's memory was never really Camilla's to win. By the time Camilla married Charles, Diana's story no longer belonged only to the House of Windsor. And by the time Camilla became queen, Diana had been dead for 25 years. Yet people still brought flowers to Kensington Palace. Documentaries still examined her life. Her clothes still entered exhibitions. Her photographs still appeared on magazine covers. Her sons still spoke about her. New generations who had not even been alive in 1997 discovered her. Time had not erased Diana. It had transformed her into history. And the Queen had helped seal that transformation on the very week Diana died. Perhaps Elizabeth did not fully understand Diana during her lifetime. Their temperaments were radically different. Elizabeth believed deeply in restraint. Diana often believed truth had to be spoken. Elizabeth represented continuity. Diana represented disruption, other through emotion. They were never simple opposites, but neither were they naturally alike. Yet at the end, Elizabeth publicly recognized something the institution had sometimes struggled to accommodate while Diana was alive. Her power came from people. Not rank. Not protocol connection. That was Diana's real crown, and nobody could transfer it. Not Charles, not Camilla, not even the Queen. So return one final time to Buckingham Palace. September 6, 1997. The coffin approaches. The crowd grows quiet. Elizabeth waits. For a moment there are no interviews, no biographies, no competing royal households, no future Queen Camilla, no arguments about titles. There is simply a dead 36-year-old woman passing the palace where so much of her adult story had unfolded. Then the sovereign lowers her head. Perhaps that was Elizabeth's most powerful answer to everything that came later. Camilla could have a future. Diana could still have her place. One did not require the destruction of the other. The monarchy would eventually recognize Camilla as queen. But long before that day arrived, Elizabeth II had stood before the world and recognized Diana. She called her gifted. She said she respected her. And when Diana passed Buckingham Palace for the final time, the woman everyone else bowed to her. Camilla could inherit a position. She could inherit ceremonies. She could stand beside the king. But there was one thing nobody could inherit, the place Diana had already taken in history, and by the time anyone might have wanted to erase it, the Queen herself had helped make it permanent.